What's the best way to deal with a square room when it comes to audio? And this question comes from Mark in Montreal, Canada. And he says, I have a room that's 18 feet by 18 feet, perfect square. And I'd like to know your opinion on room acoustics for optimum results. Some people tell me to put acoustic panels in the corners or on the back of my sofa, against the rear wall, etc. Could you give us, please, your input on this? And I've heard different opinions, and I want to get clarified to what would be the best way to avoid too much reflections or bass traps. Thank you, Mark. Well, Mark, you, my friend, are, whew, that's a tough one. Square rooms are by far the worst. You couldn't have chosen a worse size room. I know we all wind up dealing with whatever we have to work with. I'll tell you a quick little story. Years ago, when I owned part of a company called Genesis Technologies, and I had sold PS Audio in 1990, and Arnie Nudell, the founder of Infinity, and I started a loudspeaker company in Vail, Colorado called Genesis Technologies. And we made a copy, if you will, of the Infinity IRS-5 that I have in Music Room 1. Now these were called the Gen 1s, and these beasts were the same 7.5 foot tall, 4 columns, big, 12-inch servo-controlled woofers, a giant ribbon mid-range, and 20 or so ribbon tweeters. These were gorgeous rosewood veneered loudspeakers. They were, $1.25 or something. And I think we sold them for $70,000, $80,000. They were really nice. And one of my jobs was to go around the world and set these speakers up. So we would ship them to Australia, China, Europe, the United States. And Arnie did a lot of the setup in the States. I wound up going to a lot of the places around the world. And we didn't go set them up for everybody. The dealers did that. But if there was a problem, then have gun will travel. Paladin here, the audio paladin would go out and see if I could fix it. And one of these places in Singapore had a room almost identical to yours, 18 by 18. But he had put these giant Gen 1s in the middle of this thing, and it was horrendous. The bass in this, as you can imagine, if you've got 12-inch woofers, no matter what you do with the volume, no matter what you do with the low pass filter, it just saturated the room. And so the problem with square rooms is something called standing waves. Standing waves are waves that build up energy within the room. It's what makes, you hear this before, when it hits a certain note, it kind of howls. This, it roars. The waves just build up back and forth, not quite in an oscillation, but where the more energy is created than what's coming out of the woofer. And the best rooms solve this problem in two ways, usually with room dimensions, but the two ways that they solve it is with non-parallel walls. And if one wall is slightly skewed compared to the other, that helps a lot with breaking up standing waves. The other thing that can be done, and in Mark's case, unfortunately can't be done, is to change the actual dimensions. So if you use something like the golden ratio, I've written about this before. If you go to Paul's posts, I think we even, in our how-to section, psaudio.com/how-to, I think there's a room calculator in there. And if not, email me and I'll get it to you. But there are great proportions where the dimensions of the room itself can mitigate many problems of acoustics and standing waves. But in any case, this poor guy, Singapore, 18 by 18 room, Gen 1s in the middle of it, howling bass, and all we could really do, he even had a cello palette, which was at the time one of the best equalizers That was Mark Levinson, the man's second company after he got booted out of Mark Levinson, the company. He started up a company called Cello, and there he had a equalizer. I've talked about it before. It was designed by Tom Colangelo and Dick Berwin, and this was a great product. And you could selectively EQ, turning the volume up and down on specific frequencies to get rid of problems like this. And he had done a pretty good job, but still, the standing waves in this place were just killing him. All I could really do was push the woofer towers into the middle of the room, almost to where they were touching together, because in the middle of a room, you have the worst bass response you can get. And the greatest amount of bass response is when you put woofers into a corner. So this is the opposite. Get them away from the corner, get them out into the middle of the room. Something I would normally not have done, but in this case, we had way too much bass. So it was a good solution. We got the room sounding okay. But at the end of the day, what he should have done, if he could have, is somehow change those dimensions. So to Mark's specific question, yeah, if there's any way that by adding a bookshelf or something to change the dimensions on one side so that you get out of that square, anything you can do like that would be helpful. Another thing you can do is fill corners. If you have the ability to, say, build in something, take the square corners and angle them. I've used bookshelves before. You can buy maybe a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, and then behind it stuff a whole bunch of fiberglass. Anything you can do to kind of break up that room will put you in better shape. And as always, diffusion, in my opinion, is better than absorption. So I use a combination of both, but generally I like to diffuse when we're dealing with imaging. But Mark, you have bigger problems than that. You're going to have some bass issues. So anything you can do to get that room to a more irregular shape than a perfect square is going to serve you well. Sorry about your room dimensions, man. I appreciate the question, and we will talk to you tomorrow. Bye-bye.